On the 18th of March 2020, President Ramaphosa announced drastic measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus in South Africa. These measures subsequently included a nationwide lockdown, which we are in the midst of at the moment. However, at a time when the country was reeling from the impact of this announcement and grappling with the implications of regulations published under the Disaster Management Act, put in place to promote public health, other regulations were gazetted by the Minister of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, which arguably stand to have the complete opposite effect insofar as human health is concerned. The regulations to which we are referring concern an amendment to the minimum emission standards for sulphur dioxide in relation to solid fuel combustion installations. Under the National Environmental Management Air Quality Act, the Minister is empowered to publish a list of activities which result in atmospheric emissions, which have, or may have, a significant detrimental effect on the environment, including health and ecological conditions. The Minister is also empowered to amend this list. Minimum emission standards attach to each listed activity and signify the permissible amount of a particular pollutant which may be legally emitted as a result of that activity. The listing notice makes provision for compliance timeframes in respect of both new and existing plant, and to afford businesses the necessary time to retrofit their existing installations in order to reduce emissions and ultimately achieve compliance with applicable minimum emission standards. In terms of these timeframes, a new plant must comply with the new plant minimum emission standards from 1 April 2010. An existing plant must comply with minimum emission standards for existing plant by 1 April 2015 and must comply with minimum emission standards for new plant by 1 April 2020. For solid fuel combustion installations, which includes coal-fired power stations, the minimum emission standard for sulphur dioxide for existing plants was set at 3,500 milligrams per normal cubic meter for existing plant and 500 milligrams per normal cubic meter for new plant. These standards, read with the relevant compliance timeframes, meant that plants in operation on 1 April 2010 had until 1 April 2015 to ensure that sulphur dioxide emissions did not exceed 3,500 milligrams per normal cubic meter, and that on 1 April 2020, those same existing plants would be required to comply with the more stringent limit of 500 milligrams per normal cubic meter. A drastic change was made to the new plant minimum emission standard through the amendment to the listing notice published by the Minister on 27 March 2020, when the amount of sulphur dioxide legally permitted to be released from solid fuel combustion installations increased from 500 milligrams per normal cubic meter to 1,000. The effect of the amendment, implemented almost on the eve of the 1 April 2020 deadline, by which major emitters would need to have complied with the minimum emission standards for new plant, is that instead of those emitters having to meet the original sulphur dioxide standard of 500 milligrams per normal cubic meter, they are now only required to comply with a minimum emission standard which is twice as high. In other words, the March Amendment has made it lawful to emit twice as much sulphur dioxide. In a media release explaining the rationale for the amendment, the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries noted that in deciding to implement the amendment, it had taken into account a commitment to progressive improvement in air quality, submissions made on measures required to enable retrofitting of old plants, and associated socioeconomic implications. However, it also noted that at present, neither Eskom nor Sasol, the major emitters of sulphur dioxide, meet current minimum emission standards for plants constructed prior to 2010. Further, according to a technical cost-benefit analysis, Eskom and Sasol respectively would have to invest significant amounts to install the necessary pollution abatement technology, and that given the financial situation of both entities, this is unlikely in the near future. It is indisputable that harmful emissions from fossil fuel combustion cause health, environmental, and climate change impacts. It is also widely agreed that government should be seeking to impose more stringent emissions standards rather than relaxing those already in place. In fact, even before the amendment, the emission standard for sulphur dioxide was at least 28 times higher the emission limit for the same pollutant in China and countries in the European Union. Whether the amendment is lawful, in light of the government's constitutional obligations to ensure an environment that is not harmful to health or well-being, and to promote ecologically sustainable development, is debatable. These obligations are echoed in Section 2 of the Air Quality Act, which states that the objects of the Act are to provide reasonable measures for the protection and enhancement of the quality of air in the Republic, to prevent air pollution, and generally to give effect to Section 24 of the Constitution. Having been met with significant criticism from civil society and environmental activist groups, it remains to be seen how the amendment will be addressed going forward, and if it's brought before the courts, whether it will withstand judicial scrutiny.